In the 970 days, 23 hours, 33 minutes, and approximately 23 seconds that Donald Trump has been president, but who's counting? Michael Flynn, H.R. McMaster, John Bolton have held the title of National Security Advisor. And I haven't mentioned the past acting NSC advisor, Keith Kellogg, and the current acting NSC advisor, Charles Kupperman, and that only today, Trump named his fourth NSC advisor, Robert O'Brien. Musical chairs, anyone? This week on the Halli Casser-Jayne Show, I talk with John Gans, the former chief Pentagon speechwriter and current director of communications and research at the University of Pennsylvania's Global Policy Institute, about his new book, White House Warriors. And, as we do every week, my partner in politics, former White House correspondent Matthew Cooper, and I slice and dice all things politics. Welcome to the Halli Casser-Jayne Show, always available at hallicasserjayne.com and on all your favorite apps. Matt and I begin. Okay, if there was ever a crazy week, this was it. This has been it. I mean, it's just really bombarding my brain at this point. Wherever you turn, it's like, oh my God, right?
Right, although I think we say that every week.
Yeah, I can't remember who it was that I was talking to who said to me, I'm now an avid fan of Hallmark Channel, because if I don't turn that on, I lose it completely.
Too much agitation, exactly.
Yeah. I mean, will we ever go back to normal, if you will? I don't know. I'm not sure we will, but that's us.
No, that's true.
Right?
That's true. I know we're over consumers of news, and that's agitating.
It's very agitating. But that being said, we are not alone. Let's talk my dear friend Bibi Netanyahu, Israeli election. Whoa, baby.
Yeah. I'll let you take a little lead on this, because I think you have stronger thoughts and more sophisticated thoughts.
Well, I don't know if that's true. Okay, so where are we on this? It looks like Blue and White and Gans and they may even be a point ahead at this point, but all the polls have all the election things haven't been counted. Okay, fine, we get that. It still leaves, it's a parliamentary system. It's always screwy. I don't get it half the time. I really don't. But it's coalitions and it's, party, each of everybody putting
and
together.
Multiple, not just like kind of three parties
like
or
100.
4 parties. It's like,
with crazy names that mean nothing. And
they're always reforming to new parties.
Yes, and it's very crazy. But the point that I take from this right now is, and let's bring it home. He didn't do well, Netanyahu. He had taken and we know that. And whether he can form a coalition, he says he's going to, Gans says he's going to do, we don't know who's going to do what at this point. But I do think that there is something in the smell of this that we need to discuss, and that is, did Trump possibly lose this election for Bibi? Trump is more popular there than he is here. But
right.
There's a Trump effect.
But why would he hurt Bibi if that's the case?
Because I think there are a lot of Israelis who, I've had a few of them on the show, many of them, as a matter of fact, who I think are not as far right. And the polls show that now. There's a growing center in Israel, just like there is in our country, that's, trying to gain back control.
Yeah.
They may have been successful here. They may have said enough. Now, that's not to say that they don't want a right, more right than, let's say, even we have right, or a different kind of right.
Right.
Because their right is about protection and about security.
Correct. Yeah.
But there may be a backlash against Trump. And the fact that Bibi gave so much to Trump, that he's being, they're Jews in Israel.
Right.
They don't like to be owned.
Wasn't the corruption really driving it?
I don't know. I'm not 100% sure.
I mean, like
I don't
Trump,
think it's one or the other, though. That's what. Let's go there.
Yeah.
Okay.
Right.
I think it's everything. D all the above. But I also think it's possible that maybe there was too much interference. And you know what? Interesting. Trump didn't help this time as much as he did last time. Last time it was the Golan Heights. This was possibly will have an alliance on protection for you.
Right. I think that's makes sense to me. I mean, clearly there's I don't see any peace process moving anywhere.
No.
I mean, I think it was basically it seemed like it was basically a contest between those who want to continue the uneasy Israeli control over the West Bank versus those who just want to start annexing aggressively. I mean, that seemed to me the basic guiding line.
That's been the way it's been for quite some time, actually.
Right. Yeah. But this solidifies it, I think,
right.
in a way that's, I mean, we've now really passed the era of, either like Ariel Sharon's style unilateral withdrawal or, trying to make a deal. I feel like we're kind of past that at the moment. That's not happening.
I think we're past that period, and I think that one of the problems that we have from an American point of view is on the left, particularly, they don't get it. They don't get it. There is no deal with the Arabs. There's never going to be a deal with the Arabs. It isn't going to happen. It just is not. So at some point, somebody's just going to have to say, here's what we're going to do. This is 70 some odd years later, darling. Nothing's going to change, and they just get they just get more rabid, not less.
Yeah.
And so there's a lot of denial.
Sorry, let me just move for a second. Sorry, it's just got very loud where I am. Sorry.
There we go.
I have to go into a closet.
It's a good place for you. I won't let you answer that. I just think we have to get realistic about it, and that's important in this in what's going on in Israel and even the United States and our attitude towards Israel. I just feel
I understand that there's no land for peace deal on the horizon, and I recognize that's not where the Israeli public is. It's not really where even the Palestinian public is. I think the question is whether I think, as I said, it seems to me from my detached perch, are you going to start annexing heavily, or are you going to try to continue an uneasy occupation with Fatah? And that's really, and try to, find any, try to not to force the conflagration, as I think, many smaller religious parties want to do. I mean, if you're pro-annexation, you're pro-annexation. I think there's still a pretty big swath of Israeli public that's not eager to start, doing that.
I think it's 50-50 if you go by what happened in the election. If that's the only thing that influenced the election, which I don't believe it is, but I think that I think if you look at Israel, I think that there are a lot of Israelis who are really for annexation and protection. Barry Weiss. Do you know Barry Weiss?
Who doesn't know Barry Weiss?
I mean, this woman, she's brought me to tears twice. Nobody brings Halli to tears. She did a Bill Maher in November talking about anti-Semitism and what it is to be a Jew and what's going on in the world again. And she had me in tears. And she's got a new book out on anti-Semitism. And she was on something, I can't remember where it was, and I started crying again. I was like, okay, stop this girl. She was on MSNBC. I said, you got to stop. We've got to get her on the show. She is amazing. She has got the picture right. But she made a really good point, which she said, this anti-Semitism thing and how America deals with Israel. Let's just think about this. She said they talk about the Arabs, who've been dislocated, so to speak, in Israel, where, the day that it was declared, the Jewish state, they went to war and they've been at war ever since. She goes, but do you realize there are more Palestinians all over the Middle East than there are in Israel? And why don't we hear about them and how they're living in camps in all these other countries all around the Middle East and in much worse conditions than ever they are in Israel? And there's a point to be made there. I mean, I just don't think this Palestinian issue is being dealt with fairly and smartly and rightly because it's caught up in anti-Semitism. I know.
I'm sure it is for a lot of people that that Palestinian nationalism is caught up in anti-Semitism with a lot of people, but not everyone. But in any event, we'll see where Israel goes from here.
Well, I'm going to say something very shocking.
What?
I want Netanyahu to form a coalition. I want him to have one more go at it. I want him to stay in power while Trump is in power. And then it'll be time for him to go. Because I think they are accomplishing some things, whether that's a useful friendship. And I think that, they use each other, but I think it's to Israel's benefit. But, I'm a right-winger on Israel, and I worry about the security of Israel.
I mean, I don't know if it's that they've accomplished much or just the cleavages in the region have formed so that the Israeli-Palestinian cleavage is less consequential to the region.
Well, I think that's true too. Okay, I'll give you that. I'll give you that.
States and Iran.
But I don't think this is a time of retreat for Israel.
There's not going to be any retreat under blue and white.
Well, okay, maybe that's the wrong word, but you know what I'm saying, I think.
Yeah.
Here's the deal, Matt. If we get Trump out in 2020, there will be a huge sigh, not just in America, but there will be a huge sigh worldwide. And it'll be a time for reflection and a calming. And right now, take advantage of the crazy.
That's time for my could be. Could be. My weekly could be.
All right.
Maybe.
Have we dealt with that enough?
Who knows what's after Trump?
Well, yeah, I understand, but it can't be as crazy as it is now. It just cannot be. Okay.
Yeah.
So as long as we're talking about what happens in 2020, let's go to 2020. But let's start with the hearings that were yesterday.
Yes.
Lewandowski.
Sweet guy.
Oh, God. Who was his mother?
Well, it's you get these guys up there and they're talking to an audience of one.
Well, there's that, but that's who he is. He is who he is.
So they all are, but
I mean, he's just whatever. But I did. First of all, I thought it was pathetic on the Democrats' part. Feckless. Nobody properly prepared. And
5-minute questioning.
I mean, what is that? I mean, the whole thing. And Jerry Nadler, he's a good man. He's not the right man for the job. He doesn't have the killer instinct. He's not the guy. And he's just, here's the deal. The Dems, they act like this is like, let's go back to 1959. And the Republicans are like, it's like a West Side Story. One's got the.
Well, that was 1959, but
there you go. Thank you.
But point taken. Yeah.
And listen, until the new hero of the Democratic Party, who was the attorney Beck, comes out, this Barry Beck, who was at the very end, and they're not showing it. The part that needed to be aired wasn't. They did the Dems a favor by taking it off air because it was such a shameful mess. But then at the end, they use this new thing where they get a professional to go in and have a half hour.
Yeah, this is a return to what committees did. Bobby Kennedy made his name doing that kind of questioning as the counsel on, labor and criminal rackets and stuff. That's what it used to be.
Well, so he got him to say that he had obstructed justice, and he in fact was obstructing Congress as he refused to speak. They've got him on what they had Nixon on. They've got Trump on Nixon. He sent out his gun and tried to obstruct justice. Where is the difference here?
That's a fair question. It's a fair question. And now the Dems have to decide, how aggressively are they going to push contempt citations against those who are not showing up and not testifying and not.
So sweet little Nadler, after says I'm going to file I'm thinking about filing a contempt. He is thinking all the time. He just isn't acting.
Right. Well, do you want to get back to Nancy? Because you haven't done it yet this week.
I knew we were.
Or are you taking a week off?
No, honey, I'm not taking a week off because I think it's more interesting. This morning there was a story. I can't remember where it was. I mean, that there is a growing schism between Nadler and Pelosi, and Nadler is all for impeachment, and Pelosi is holding her ground on this. Listen, do nothing, Nancy. I mean, I have a hashtag for her. Do nothing, Nancy. And I don't get it. Talk to me. Please talk to me.
Well, I think we've been in this place for a while. I'm not defending her, but I think her position is that, you can jump on it. Impeachment, she's open to it. She's open to an inquiry, but she's not there yet for, pulling the trigger, and thinks it'll be destructive for the members who got them the majority, and that she's potentially imperiling her majority. Now, you can disagree with that. You can make the opposite case. I think I would probably go with the opposite case too, but I don't think it's a crazy argument on her part. I don't think it's Neville Chamberlain appeasement.
Let me throw this out at you. Where I think the mistake here is that rather than take the no position, even though she's publicly saying, we'll explore. I think she needs to go a little bit further and give them the full guns to do what they want to do, at least as part of this, and I'm going to put it in quotes, inquiry. And if she weren't so trying to stop this because she's so afraid of what they're going to find, which they've already found, it took them one day and a really bad performance, and it was still there. They got him to say what he needed to say.
I don't think she's afraid of what they're going to find. I think that's unfair. there. I think she still thinks, legitimately or not, that an impeachment inquiry doesn't have the popularity in the districts that she needs to maintain for a Democratic majority.
Well, so let me throw this back at you. Neither did it at the time when they went after Nixon. They had to convince the public that Nixon needed to be impeached. The people weren't with him. The voters were not there, but they did it. They did it. And here's my point. Let me just make my point. She is hampering the investigation, and it's different than what was in the Mueller report, Matt, when they can hear and watch a Lewandowski bumble himself into, he thought he was being such a smartass. I mean, he obviously didn't graduate with high honors in from the Trump School of Lies because he got caught. That if you let them do that, and then make a decision. You still don't have to. Remember my original argument. You just got to have the hearings and do them successfully. You don't have to go through the impeachment.
No, I think that's a legitimate point. Okay. I mean, but the problem, I think we'll agree thus far, is that at least in terms of optics and also substance, the hearings to date have not delivered much because so many people are either not testifying or when they get there, they don't get much of it. I mean, yesterday is probably the most productive hearing day in a long time.
But I think that's because she hasn't let them do what they want to do. She's controlling them in terms of what they can do and how, in other words, if I were the speaker, I would have said yesterday, go and get the sergeant at arms and arrest this guy who's in contempt now.
Right.
And she's the one who's telling him, no, you can't do that. You can't go, full steam ahead.
I'm not sure Nadler has the appetite for that either.
I'm not so sure that's true.
I mean, there's no question there's some tension between them. He wants to
move on.
He wants to crank it up a bit. But as you say, he's always thinking.
Yeah. Problem with Democrats in general is they're always thinking. And this concept that we'll fix this at the polls. Oh, really? Are you sure? Because I'm not so sure. That's another bad bet. Trump is good at running elections and stealing them.
Well, I think as you've said before, they're not mutually exclusive. That, you want two tracks.
But we don't have two tracks right now. And maybe, and like I said, that's Nancy Pelosi's fault. So yeah, I'm going to call her Do Nothing Nancy. And I'm going to also say,
I think we can always answer the question, if we were reversing the situation, what would a Republican controlled House be doing?
Well,
they formed a whole special committee just for Benghazi.
Right.
So.
Right. So there is that too. And let me also go back to Lewandowski, who is the scum of the earth. I mean, he really is, just stands for everything that's wrong right now. CNN had him on this morning, and Alison Camerata did an interview with him, and my God, on Twitter, they were going absolute ape crap crazy. The guy admitted that he lies to the press. What is he doing? In the old days, we didn't put liars on and interview them and make them give them credence by doing so. And she went at him, and he was doing a Kellyanne Conway kind of, rap, never letting a word in edgewise. And long story short, she finally he said, you're not answering. He goes, she said to him, you're listening with your mouth, which she handled
That's a good line.
She handled him quite well, I must say. But there is that issue. And it is curious to me. I spend a lot of time on it, but I'm fascinated by the fact that, there we are. Should these people be getting exposure? I'm not sure that they should be.
Well, obviously you want them to get exposure in hearings, so it's not that they're not getting exposure.
That's what I mean.
It's that whether they should, whether the journalists are doing them a service by interviewing them, I think is your point.
Yeah, you just don't know. It's an interesting thing, but let me this will be the last part of this and we'll move on. Trump's not suffering from any of this. You hear me, Matt? Dems are still doing business with him like everything is normal, and he's not suffering for it. Does that not tell you something about how the Dems are mishandling this?
Well, what's the, specifically, should they, let the government shut down? What should they do?
Well, go to the mat.
But what does that mean?
For me, when you have issues like you're not getting anywhere on the gun control issue for one, even though the Dems passed it. In other words, they keep doing everything normally and not making start going after, start opening mouths and, take out the knives fight back. Get on the steps of Capitol Hill and say, here's what we're trying to do, folks, and here's what, because on the gun issue for sure, and I know they did that.
I think that's literally what they did the first day they got back. They got on the steps and they said, this is,
No, I'm
guns.
talking about, they need to work with all of the, like, Move On and all of the other organizations and say, come on. They need to do something different. They need to get creative. But polite, which is what you saw, by the way, yesterday. I couldn't believe how polite Nadler was. He even said, no, we'll let Lewandowski. I'm like, are you kidding? That's what I would have called the gendarmes.
Right.
Too polite.
No, I hear where you're coming from.
Do you agree? Do you agree?
Yeah, no, I get where you're coming from.
Yeah, it's just, They need to get I guess the guests can't do it. And you know what? I don't know what happens at the end of the day. All right, let's move on because something else surfaced this week very quickly. And that's, they came back after Kavanaugh. There's a new book out. 2 New York Times screwed up and ran a piece. They missed, a lot of stuff. On the other hand, there was some information that was quite, viable that, bottom line, it turns out, I think people like you and I knew it. Maybe the public didn't realize just how much the Kavanaugh hearings had been hampered by the fact that the president was trying to control the FBI in investigation when they took that extra week to.
Yeah, well, I think there's no question that when they gave, after these things came out, that they gave the FBI only a week to follow up meant that there wasn't really going to be a big investigation. There was just going to be the appearance of one.
They're not going to impeach Kavanaugh. I don't care if the candidates, the Democratic candidates, grandstanded on it and said, yeah, impeach him, because they won't impeach the president. They're sure as hell not going to impeach Kavanaugh. That said, is it a good thing to continue to bloody him up? I think it is. What do you think? This is an odious character.
I think truth is important, and pursuing it as journalists are and as they might do in inquiries in Congress, and whether or not that leads to a more substantial movement for impeachment, I don't know. But I think this is something that gripped the country, and following it up is not a bad thing. And so, yeah, I think it's all worth pursuing. I mean, it was a scarring period. I think that,
to say the least. There's another good sidebar of continuing to pummel the Republicans and Kavanaugh with, and that is it ends the career of a most odious character, Susan Collins. I think this is gonna turn out some voters in Maine. Yeah,
I wouldn't write her off yet, but I think
she's already hurting in the polls though. So
yeah, there's no question. I mean, look, that's. But Trump is going to play very hard in the 2nd district in Maine, which he won last time. It's one of those only states where you can win by district in the presidential. And so I wouldn't write her off yet. But yeah, it's definitely hurt her a lot. But,
among a very strong voting part of the electorate, even in Maine, women.
No question.
Yeah.
No question. They have
so
a good
I think that's fair.
Potentially against her. So.
And the other thing is, I'm not sure.
Also, she's, it was one thing to just vote for him or just say, look, I'm going to, innocent until proven guilty, I'm going to vote for him. But she went in there and said, well, he's reassured me he's pro-choice, where he's not going to overturn Roe and he's not going to start bashing. And look, that may be true, but it sounds naive in the extreme.
Well, also, she went out and stood on wherever she was the other day and said, I don't regret my vote, even though he has hurt Roe v. Wade already.
Yeah.
And now there's more, scuttlebutt about him. And, he's.
Yeah. But I got to say, the Times really, they did kind of screw this up.
Oh, my God.
I mean, first there was the weird putting it in the op-ed page and then portraying it just as a, feature piece about what it's like to be Hispanic at Yale in the 80s and kind of burying the lead, which is a...
So, my friend, the editor of some very prestigious magazines, you want to explain to me what that was about?
Well, reading, from the response of the deputy editor of the opinion section, I guess when they run book excerpts in that expanded Sunday opinion section, they always slap like analysis on it, and they still screwed it up. I mean, that's their explanation. Look, even if they ran it that way, there should still have been an adjacent news story that said, like, holy shit, da, 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 da.
Right.
But then on the other hand, the charge, they left out the fact that the woman in question doesn't remember this thing, which was kind of a big thing to leave out.
I would say so. It's in the book.
Yeah, it's in the book, to be fair to the reporters, but...
the reporters, I saw them interviewed, and they said what they think happened is they cut out something, and by addendum, cut out that part too.
Well, they didn't want to identify her originally, right. Because that's their policy for like op-eds, but in the book, she's obviously identified, and
it's really it smells, it stinks, God knows.
I mean, this is about the second.
Yes,
cock waving incident. It's not we already had the first one.
Right.
Look, I think the point of their book is that he was, he was a real kind of shit, and that he was not a shit in later life, at least in the way he treated people around him.
I don't know. There's a wonderful video of how he, and if you're into body language, you would watch this video of he and his wife. Did you see it?
No.
Okay, and it's when I think he was being sworn in or something, and I mean oh my God, he brushes his wife aside like she's a piece of dust.
Yeah.
I mean, this is not a nice man, and she's, there's nobody, whether you're schooled.
Well, I wouldn't trust. I'm wary of trying to figure out anyone's marriage.
It's not about the marriage.
Even my own.
It's not about the marriage. It's not about the marriage. It's about the kind of gruff person he is, which he displayed to us during the hearing. For me, I'm not crazy about the fact that he did this kind of stuff and had an obvious the hearing itself, his performance, and that was, for me, that is not a sane, steady, reasonable, thoughtful.
No, I have to say, even in comparison to Thomas, was quite restrained compared to Kavanaugh. Right. I mean, Thomas said nothing like, he didn't turn to, Arlen Specter or he didn't turn to Joe Biden and say, I don't know, did you leave pubic hair on a coat? I don't know, did you?
The bottom line is he's not right for the job. And so what happens with that, we don't know. And we have to move on because I have two more and we're running out of time. But I just want to say that, ick. The guy is ick. And it would be horrible for the next 50 years to have this dude on the court or however long he would survive. And hopefully they can shame him sooner or later to step down or something, because he really, 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 really is an awful human being.
Yeah, don't see it. But
okay, I don't see it. But did we do Iran yet? Did we?
We didn't. No, we didn't really do Iran.
Okay, hot mess. Self-made. How ironic we get Bolton out of there, the big warmonger. We may go to war with Iran anyway. It's just like, you have precisely 2 minutes to talk to me about that, because I do have some stuff with the elections that I want to do.
Well, look, there was this attack on Saudi refineries and petroleum production that had caused some severe damage, and it was done by drones, and the Houthi-backed rebels in Yemen are claiming responsibility, but the Saudis and the Americans are pointing to the Iranians. The question is, is there going to be a military response? There's no question Iran has been kind of escalating things in the Gulf in the wake of these sanctions. They're seizing tankers and being just generally more disruptive. And the question is, if the U.S. and the Saudis decide they want to strike back at Iran, what will they do, and what could that lead to? And, so it's this is serious. I don't know. I'm not sure there's going to be a strike back. Generally does happen pretty quickly. They don't wait. Well,
they just sent what's his name over to the Secretary Pompeo over to the Saudis, and they're in conversation about what to do. What
I mean, they could strike against Iranian proxies and not Iran, or they could, make it fairly limited against Iran. And I know we're about to go to the UN General Assembly where everybody is, so that complicates things. I don't know. Remember, Trump's still been making noises like, "Oh, I want to talk to the Iranians." Now he's changed his mind.
Right.
Let's. Yeah. let's see how this plays out. I'd be foolish to guess.
Bottom line, this didn't have to be, and it's all about getting out of the Iran deal without having a backup plan or working it through with them. They just this is Trump's real problem.
No, I agree. If you put the squeeze on them in the hope that they're just going to give up, things that they had in the Iranian deal. Yeah, you're dreaming, and to think they didn't have any options to fight back is also dreaming.
Of course. It was poorly handled, and it's a mess, and we will. Yeah, it's a bad situation. All right, let's go to election 2020. Warren rising, but so is Biden. The left-wing press wants to say only Warren is rising. I think she went up 6, he went up 5. It's not like he's not holding his own quite well, actually. But she did have that rally in New York. Her home. If they don't love her in Manhattan, where do they love her, right? 20,000 people that Trump said, anybody can do that. Yeah, okay.
Yeah, and Bernie had bigger in 2016. I mean, it's an accomplishment. It is a measure. It's not about
it doesn't always go to votes, although Trump.
But you traded for 1,000 Iowans, yeah.
Right. So it's interesting. A friend of mine said to me yesterday, I can't stomach her. I can't listen to. She's like a schoolmarm. Is that what I want to listen to for the next 4 years? I don't want to be lectured for the next 4 years. That's what a lot of people are saying to me.
Well, I think there are people, there are a lot of people who react that way to her. Obviously, a lot don't. And, we'll just see. I mean, I do think she sort of captures the kind of, a lot of where the party is. But Biden is, proving more resilient than people thought. And, the question is, he going to, stay strong into those early stages?
Well, he's not going to fall over.
So far, there's no sign he's going to fall over. I mean, I think they keep waiting for a bathrobe moment where he comes out in his pajamas and starts blathering. And
I think he's doing quite well. And I think he's always, been kind of fumbling in an odd way. He just did it better when he was younger. Maybe, I don't know, or people are out to get him. I know there's a new video that Trump put together of all of his gaffes, but hey, that's Joe, and I think that helps him. That doesn't hurt him. I do want to say this, though. I'm on my Steve Bullock thing, and I still am. And I know last week you said to me, things happen. And this is how it looks now, but it can change. Something crazy, because that's just what happens. And I heard a lot of other people saying that in the last couple of days after you said that. And it was interesting to me that there are a lot of people out there who are kind of saying that, they're not so sure that there's not another character who comes up,
there always is.
And rides rides on the horse. Well, the perfect person to do that, to ride on his white horse and to save the day, of course, as far as I'm concerned, is Steve Bullock, who is the most moderate.
He's not going to leave his wife, Hallie.
No.
I mean, I want you to just get that out of your head.
I'm not into anybody leaving their wives. Just give me the fantasy.
Okay, all right. I just want you to be realistic about the whole first lady thing.
I was happy that Jeff Bridges came out for him to raise money for him, because he needs to get on that next stage.
Yeah, well, there are a lot of celebs, liberals in Montana. You should be tapping.
Yeah. So I think that's where we are. I do want to bring up also very quickly that before we close, there are troubles in Bernieville. Inside fighting within the campaign. He is not in control anymore. I said a couple of weeks ago, or a few weeks ago, I said, I don't think he's got a Chinaman's chance. I don't think he's got a Chinaman's chance. I don't think he's got any chance. What do you think?
Well, I guess I'd share conventional wisdom that, Warren has done considerable damage to him. Let's see how it plays out. He's sitting on a lot of money. He still has a big, network from last time. He's got his devotees. Do I think he'll be the nominee? Probably not, but,
Would Warren take one for the team as vice president?
To who?
Biden.
Oh, I think there's so much hydraulic pressure in the party to put a minority on the ticket that I don't think that's going to happen.
But would she?
Yeah, sure. Why not? Yeah, I think so. But
I don't think
I'm not sure.
I'm sorry.
I'm not sure he'd want her. So but yeah. Technically, sure.
Well, if that was the way to resolve the issue within the party to make sure that, the crazy get out the vote is so high. Because, and here's my only reason that I asked that question. I know that, there's pressure to have a person of color on the ticket. But if it's Biden, he has such extraordinary support from the African American community. I don't know that that's all that important. Among the voting members of the black community who are the older stalwart sticking with him.
Yeah, well, you know, you may be right. And
Just saying.
she is Native American, so that, that gets you a lot of the way there.
Thanks, Kemosabe. I so appreciate you reminding.
Yeah, so now it's okay.
It's okay. All right. We're about to close. I just want to make a last thing, and that is rest in peace, Cokie Roberts. You know, for journalists like me, she really was the best. The best. The best. What a woman. What a loss. How sad. Another victim of breast cancer. It shouldn't be. It should not be. So, and we close on that
I agree
note.
wholeheartedly. Yes.
Thank you, Matt.
Thank you, Halli. See you next time.
See you next time. Bye.
Okay. Bye.
You are listening to The Halli Casser-Jayne Show. The Halli Casser-Jayne Show posts new podcasts Wednesdays, 3 p.m. Eastern at hallicasserjayne.com and is available wherever you listen to your podcasts. Be sure to find us on Spotify, YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, and on all your favorite apps. You can find The Halli Casser-Jayne Show on your Alexa device, too. Just say The Halli Casser-Jayne Show. Oh, and come play with me on Twitter at The Halli CJ Show. On the third floor of the massive executive office building in Washington, D.C., sits one of the most consequential yet least understood institutions in the U.S. government. In White House Warriors, How the National Security Council Transformed the American Way of War, John Gans, the former chief Pentagon speechwriter and current director of communications and research at Perry Worldhouse, the University of Pennsylvania's Global Policy Institute, for the first time ever, offers an inside look at the people and the power of the National Security Council, the NSC, and how its role has grown since its creation more than 70 years ago at the start of the Cold War. At a time when many Americans have doubts about government and questions about so-called deep state unelected officials controlling policy, the NSC, especially Donald Trump's, is a source of further mystery and controversy. To Gans, understanding the National Security Council is tantamount to grasping the missing link of foreign policy. Who influences the president's biggest decisions? How and why? Let's talk with John Gans. Hello there.
Hi, Halli. How are you?
I'm great. How about you?
I'm doing great. Thanks so much for having me on.
Well, thank you for being here. We're thrilled to have you. This is a subject I've wanted to get into, and I'm going to have you play professor through a lot of this. I think I get more questions about what is the NSC than about just about anything we ever talk about on this show.
Is that right? All right. That sounds all right. Well, that's good for me, I guess.
And that's why I was so happy to get you booked on here. So let's start with this. It's such an important book. I have to say that. And it's a good read. But I'm going to ask you about this National Security Council. First, let's start with a little history here. What about its beginnings? It's a relatively new in the scheme of the Republic. Talk to me.
Well, it's funny, right? I mean, it's relatively new, and like much of American statecraft is, right? Because most of the United States' foreign policy, both in terms of actually what we do abroad and how we make it in Washington, is really the product of the sort of World War II and post-World War II era, right? And so the United States sort of became a global power in World War II. And there were a lot of people, and I always say this when I'm teaching students is, and speaking at book events and everything else, is that Franklin Roosevelt, who was the master of World War II, and obviously, though he died before it was over, is the reason the United States probably won it, is didn't need a National Security Council to fight World War II or win it, but all of government thought he did, because, you know, what happened in World War II is that Franklin Roosevelt basically ran it himself out of the Oval Office with a few special aides that he liked and a few military leaders who he sort of respected and trusted, and kind of left everybody else to sort of try and figure out what was going on. He was not a big communicator. He was somebody who admitted himself was a bit of a juggler. So he said, I will lie and I will basically mislead in an effort to basically win the war, which is that he basically didn't tell government what his plans were. And he kept everybody in the dark, including his vice president, Harry Truman. And for much of government and for the military, who were sort of facing a massive two-front war, you know, against two of the greatest military powers in history, right, Japan and Germany, were nervous about this. They kind of said, this is no way to fight a war. And with a sick president, right, with the power of nuclear weapons that only a few people knew about, but, especially after it was used against Japan, there was certainly a knowledge that the stakes had gotten higher. And his government was growing. I mean, I sort of explained this to people that people are shocked. And I used to tell this when I would give tours when I was working at the Pentagon, that the Pentagon was built during World War II while we were fighting it, right? So the government exploded in during and after World War II. And so they all kind of thought that juggling is no way to do foreign policy. And so the National Security Council was kind of the revenge on Roosevelt's approach to the war, which was they said, let's get everybody in a room. Let's all figure out what we need to do together so we can kind of figure out how to integrate policy, and let's make a decision together. And so the Defense Department, specifically the Navy Secretary at the time, James Forrestal, said, let's do a council. And the Congress basically agreed to do this, and the White House sort of admitted that maybe it would be worthwhile. And so they created a National Security Council, which at the time was the President, the Vice President, the Secretaries of State and Defense, and a few other folks to sit around a table and come up with the decisions about how the United States did things.
Okay. You had me enthralled. I was like, let him go. This is fascinating stuff.
The funny thing about it is that, that basically they admitted that if you're going to get this many big names in a room, you're going to need somebody to make sure they show up on time, somebody that tells them what to say, and somebody that records the decisions made, like basically takes notes. And so they created, in one line of this big law that created the National Security Council, what they called a staff. It was basically a secretarial staff to help make sure that this all happened. But the problem is that the president kind of felt like he needed more help and to sort of fight for his own issues and own prerogatives. And so the staff grew from this humble administrative beginnings, right, where they were basically secretaries and stenos in the room, to become almost the 400 people strong, sitting at the executive office of the president, right next to the executive office building, right next to the White House, and reporting to the National Security Advisor, which is a title that didn't exist, or a position that didn't exist in the original law. And so almost out of thin air, this staff and institution has grown in Washington to be the most powerful position in Washington, and yet nobody knows where it came from, nobody knows why it grew, and nobody knows what it does today. And so I wrote a book to help sort of expose them to the world and expose them to the public.
And I think it needed to be done. The National Security Advisor is an appointed job, right? It's not subject to confirmation by Congress. And I think that's an important point here, right?
Absolutely. I mean, I think that it is a staff position. I think Condi Rice, when she took the job, said it's rarefied staff. But it is a staff position, and as a result of sort of the sort of Congress's deference and the president's prerogatives, they have allowed this position to grow in power and size and stature without ever requiring it be congressionally confirmed. There have been times during history where some people said, well, maybe this has gotten too big, or maybe this has grown too powerful. And generally speaking, the presidents have said, no, we're not going to open this up to sort of the public and to Congress. And Congress has allowed them to do it. I think that's a mistake. I think I sort of talk about that in the book, that to have such power without accountability just leads to inevitable problems. And we've seen those problems in history, whether it's the sort of famous Iran-Contra situation, right, where you had a bunch of aides basically try some shenanigans and try to create a scheme and then, basically carry it out with minimal oversight from anybody. Or, even today, right, there's NSC staffers who are working things right now, and we have no idea what it is, whether it's, whether you agree with President Trump or not. These are staffers who are doing this right now. And I talk about the different examples. And one of the things that sort of is amazing to me is if you look administration by administration, as I do in the book, at what the staff has done, it's an astonishing track record of unaccountable power. And even friends who served on the staff, I worked in the Obama administration, but even folks who served on the staff in that administration or since sort of say, I was hesitant to the confirmation conversation, but after you actually look at the sum total of what the staff has done in its history, it does make you rethink it a bit and to sort of understand these war stories. I think you're going to come out believing may need to be known to the public even more.
Yeah, and there are, things have been changing kind of rapidly in the last, 25, 30 years. I mean, Congress has, given up a lot of its powers on foreign policy and on War Powers Act and, to the president, who seems to have full reign. This is a little scary, some of this stuff, seems to me.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny to me. As somebody who's come of age, sort of, especially after 9/11, but especially over the past 20 or 30 years, where you had the response to Vietnam was a much more aggressive, forward-leaning Congress to sort of, both watch what wars we got ourselves into with the War Powers Act, but also more closely monitor how we fought them, right? And so, exposures of the intelligence community's role in the wars and everything else they were doing in the 60s and 70s, exposure of sort of how we fought Vietnam. These were all, there was a purpose and a process put in place after Vietnam to sort of make sure that we didn't do that again. And yet a lot of it got untangled after the Cold War. And to a degree, I think you could argue that what we've seen in Iraq and Afghanistan, which have not been sterling policy successes, has been the result of sort of a lack of accountability and a lack of congressional monitoring. And yet, for whatever reason, there just has not been the response to this sort of frustrations and failures in Iraq and Afghanistan that you would have expected. And I think if anybody had said on September 12th that we're going to, 2001, we're going to basically pursue a 17, 18-year-long war here with limited success and a lot of doubts about how it's going, and not expect congressional revolt over it, I think you would have been shocked, and people would have disagreed that that's possible. But that's exactly what we've seen.
Yeah, pretty shocking to this one, I'll tell you. I'd like to see some changes there. Going back to some of the more notable, at least in our time, Kissinger, Condoleezza Rice, Henry McMaster, some are more influential over their presidents than others. Maybe some are too influential. Do you have some thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I mean, I think what you find is that these positions are sort of what you make of them, right? And so you've had people who have made a lot of these positions, which are, when you're in a staff position, you can pursue your own agenda. You can sort of work to fight for the president's agenda. There's a lot of different pathways that are up to you. You can be more public. You can be less well known. There's a lot of different paths you can take. What I think is most interesting is that even in 1968, and I sort of cover from, look at the Nixon administration, and by putting it into context of the administrations before it, I think everybody always looks at Kissinger as this sort of, as what he ended up as, which was, the only person who's ever been National Security Advisor and Secretary of State at the same time. And from the Nixon, when the Nixon resigns and Ford takes over, Kissinger is probably the strongest foreign policy person that's ever existed in American history. But when you look at him in his more humble beginnings, right, he was a guy who came into government in 1968 with relatively little experience. And he struggled for a lot of the year of the first year of the Nixon administration. There were a few times where Nixon and his sort of closest aides, his White House aides, kind of said, like, maybe Henry isn't the guy. Maybe you can't get it done. And he used the staff to basically figure out a way to both empower himself and to pursue his own agenda. And so that is a position that he basically helped create and build because, it didn't really exist. There was, previous advisors had power mostly in their personal relationships with the president, but Kissinger really made it helped start the process of institutionalizing power where anybody who sat in that seat would have power. And to a degree, I think he would have even giggled at the thought that Condi Rice, who came in 2001, under George W. Bush, would have even more institutional power than he could have even dreamed of, right? Because he helped sort of institutionalize and put the security advisor in a position to chair all the meetings and to put the staff there. And at the time when Kissinger took over, when he basically took the command of all the meetings and put himself in as the chair of all the meetings, it was called the coup d'etat at the Hotel Pierre, which is where Richard Nixon held his transition in 1968. And it was such a big change and almost so violent in how fast and aggressively it happened that, people at the State Department called it a coup. And whereas 30 years later, almost 30-something years later, Connie Rice walks in and has to fight Dick Cheney for position in the meetings, the vice president. But she never even had to worry about the State Department ever even hoping to have control of the meetings. So what you see is that, the job is what people make of it, but they've been able to, it's a much stronger job than it was 30, 40, 50 years ago. And so even with a president like Donald Trump, who is a very irregular president, right? He's somebody who hasn't had much governing experience, isn't sort of from the trainings that have typically trained American presidents, whether it's law or, sort of political training. He comes into office and finds a staff there that has worked for President Obama, which is one of the strongest staffs in history. And, he's used that to do everything from write his tweets to make decisions on Afghanistan. But it's a much stronger job than it was 30, 40 years ago, in part because of the work that those 30, 40 years ago did, and in part because, a lot of people in Washington have sort of decided to give their jobs to the White House rather than do them.
I'm stuck on two things. Henry Kissinger giggling.
Yeah.
It's just not a picture I can see.
Well, it's funny because I tell the story about, somebody was asking me the other day about like what it's like to work on the staff. And I was telling a story about Tony Lake, one of his staffers, who, in this, all the secret diplomacy, what's sort of amusing, like Kissinger loved secrecy and loved secret diplomacy, but that kind of meant that they had to figure out how to do things on their own a lot. And so he would have these secret meetings with the North Vietnamese in Paris, and he'd make commitments to say, okay, well, we'll do that by this date. And then he would leave the meetings and he'd look at the person who was with him. And then in this case it was Tony Lake, who was a young Foreign Service officer. And they'd say, he'd say, all right, we'll figure out how to do it. But you can't call anybody in government to help you. And so Tony Lake was, a Foreign Service officer, a diplomat. He had served in Vietnam and Saigon at the embassy, but he had no military experience. So he starts trying to figure out how to withdraw troops from Vietnam. So he's doing the math on his basic, in his notebook, writes up a memo, an agreement, and they basically give it to the North Vietnamese. And they walk out of the meeting and they get on the plane ride home. And Tony Lake goes, well, I did the math wrong. I just divided wrong. And I guess Henry Kissinger just laughed. He was just like, all right, well, what are we going to do? There's not much we can do about it. So he had a sense of humor, but it also shows you how powerful these folks can be.
The other term that I got caught on was you called Trump irregular, in quotes, I would suspect. And that takes me here. The NSC appointed advisors, and then there are, the government agencies, the staff, the government workers who stay in places as administrations change. Welcome to the federal government. But here's where I want to go. There are many Americans now who have doubts about government and questions about so-called deep state. And I say the word deep state, and I cannot begin to tell you the visions I get in my head. It's too weird.
For sure.
But the current President Trump fans the flames of suspicion. So let's not dance around the bush. Is there something for Americans to be suspicious of? I mean, where are you on what seems to be that question of the day? Should we be suspicious or just nervous because maybe too many have power?
Well, I'd say two things. I think Americans are suspicious by nature, and I mean that in the best sense of the term, right? This country was founded in a revolution against an unchecked, unaccountable power that we couldn't see, right? In the sense of, we were frustrated by getting handed decisions that we didn't agree with and didn't necessarily think fit our interests. This was the American Revolution, right? And so we've always been suspicious of that, and I think the founders built a government, I think, accurately and effectively planning for the fact that Americans are suspicious of those who serve, and so and those who sort of sit in power. And so we've tried to build in some process and procedures to help avoid that. And so I think Americans are necessarily and inherently suspicious of power. And that has meant a lot of good things. I think what you have right now is that in the aftermath of 9/11, the U.S. government grew and became, by choice, a much harder entity to see. And so a lot more power is taken and to a degree affected by people the American government have never heard of. And that has been done out of expedience, right? Because there have been national security challenges in the aftermath of 9/11 and more. That's been done out of just ease because, frankly, the U.S. government doesn't work very well. It's a very partisan, polarized electorate, and that has led to a very partisan, polarized Washington. And so while we'd like to think that politics stops at the water's edge, it doesn't. And so we have a lot of that inefficiency and breakdowns that have sort of we try to avoid in government and national security. So there's been an effort to try and avoid that. So we've tried to hide things in secrecy and things along those lines. And to a degree, it's a very busy, crazy world. And so there's an argument to be made for it's not worth having it all exposed, our national security decisions all exposed to all of the adversaries and potential adversaries in the United States. But the problem with that is that you actually lead to an issue where the American people should rightly worry about a deep state, because American people haven't had many foreign policy elections, but there have been a few, and I talk about this in the book, especially in the conclusion, which is if you look at the 2006 election, where the first big wave election where Democrats were elected to majorities in the House and the Senate, was specifically about ending the Iraq War. That's what everybody campaigned on. That's what they all said they were going to do when they got in office. And they won this huge election, and George W. Bush admitted it was a thumping. Remember he had that famous press conference the day after, thumping, and he fired Don Rumsfeld the day later. And so there's all this suspicion that the election sent a message about the war. And instead of ending it, George W. Bush just 2 months later sent a surge of 30,000 troops to Iraq and doubled down on our intervention in Iraq. And then you have Barack Obama, who famously gave this speech in 2002 against dumb wars, and came into the office. I think a lot of people thought, we're going to not do dumb wars anymore, at least have a better management of the ones we have. And he ends up, basically doubling down on Afghanistan, launching Libya, the fight against ISIL, and things along those lines. And then you have Donald Trump, who campaigned against running, basically keeping our exposure in the Middle East the same, talked about getting out of Afghanistan, talked about getting out of all the foreign wars, and has come in office and kind of kept the policy in Afghanistan basically the same from the Obama years. And so the staff has been central to each one of those decisions that has not exactly been lined up with what the American people voted for. And so
go ahead.
I'm not surprised that people worry about a deep state. I don't think there is an official organized deep state where there's a secret handshake and codes being used in Washington, but there is a big bureaucracy, and the big bureaucracy has its own interests. And I think because the U.S. Congress, which is the best way for the American people to exert their will on foreign policy, has basically thrown up their hands in managing foreign policy, there's not enough of watch on what those folks do every day. And so while there's not an official deep state, there's plenty of reasons for Americans to worry about one.
But there is a kind of an interesting thing in that, and it's this: you're always going to have the bureaucrats. I mean, they're the people who do the real work, I guess. The others take a lot of credit, I think, a lot of the times for what others do. But it does cause a kind of interesting interplay between those who are always there, from administration to those who come in as political appointees, if you will. They can hold each other, up against each other. So there's an interplay there. I just wanted to make the point about this deep state thing, because I think that's worrisome to me, because there is that interplay and there's a check and balance on that interplay anyway. Anyway, go ahead.
There should be, right? And I think there definitely should be in theory, you should have a pretty interesting balance between those folks that come in with the president and those that stay, and, in a civil sort of engagement. I talk about the military officers. You start off as a military officer, you are basically committing to a 7, 8, 10-year life expectancy in terms of your career in the military. Some people end up staying and doing well and pursuing their sort of pathway up, whether it's, they become like a general or anything along those lines. But you can have a 20, 25-year career. And to a degree, there should be a balance between the consistency that comes with some of those folks, career military officers, career diplomats. And then there should be some, additional dynamism that comes when you add sort of the democratically elected president and the people he puts in or she puts in when a woman gets elected president, right? There should be a great chemistry that comes with those combinations. What we have found, though, is that the consistency is frustrating to those who want revolution, and the political interventions are frustrating to those that just kind of want to keep doing things the same way. So it's kind of led – I talk in the book about how there's a polarization in government, government, right, between the different agencies and between those who stick around and don't stick around. And for whatever reason, our current polarization leads to breakdowns in terms of people actually working together. They just kind of throw their hands up and say, well, wait, and policy will stall. The problem is that national security doesn't stop, right? So, there's a current issue right now between the president, Donald Trump, and his national security advisor, where there's clearly a difference of opinion. They've sort of publicly, Trump has commented about how he disagrees on Venezuela, Iran, and just recently North Korea. And what you end up in a situation is that, those issues aren't going away while these two people are disagreeing. And I like to tell people that national security is no different than your job, right, in the sense of you have days where you don't like your boss, you have days when you don't want to be at work, you have days where you hate your coworkers, and there are days when you love all those things, right? That's just the nature of work. The challenge is that threats and wars don't go away when you have a bad day. And so you have a situation where those breakdowns tend to happen more and more between the civil and the political and between the president and some of the people. But the issues don't go away. And the staff, as I demonstrate in the book, is very often the people that step to the fore and try to solve those problems and those breakdowns. The problem is that they're generally not the best advocates for policy. They don't always have the best ideas. And I go through the wars from Vietnam to today and look at all the bad ideas they've done. And that has led to real problems for us. It's not a great track record. And I think that's one of the things, because it's never been exposed before, people have less of an appreciation for how bad a track record it really is.
As somebody who's worked on a book like this, how are you and what are your thoughts? Are you into complete sunlight? Do you think some of this should be behind the scenes? Do you think we hurt, our national security by exposing everything and a president talking about, a deep state? How does that fit into the realm of it all, to the picture of it all, to the great United States? I mean, I think sometimes we look like idiots. I want to also add to that, politics is playing a much bigger part in the day-to-day people as much as it is in the others. I mean, we all have political opinions in this country. I think at one point maybe we kept them to ourselves, some of us who were in certain jobs, and maybe that doesn't happen anymore. Anyway, I threw a lot at you. What's your response?
Yeah, I mean, my response is, and I served as a speechwriter at the Defense Department and have continued to sort of do some work at the Defense Department of the Navy Reserves. And I'm sort of on this side of the public will understand and the public will better support policies when they understand all the other alternatives, right? So the president makes this very difficult decision on whatever it is, whether it's Iran, North Korea, or anything else. And generally speaking, most people would agree that the options aren't great, right? North Korea wants nuclear weapons. That's a hard thing to change from the United States. But what I would say is that Americans would appreciate the choices to talk to Kim Jong-un or not talk to him if they better understood that the other options are pretty terrible. Like war would be pretty terrible, right? And so I think by keeping things closed, and I often advocated in government for talking more about things and was often not popular at the Defense Department for trying to do that, because in fact, most people don't appreciate how hard these government jobs are. And if they did, they might appreciate their government a little bit more. And yet we constantly, and the easiest thing to do is not talk about things publicly because they're controversial, because they're hard to understand. But I'm pro talking to the American people about things and pro opening this thing up, because most of the secrets that need to be secrets can be kept. But the stuff that's the sort of in between is so vast and so uncontroversial that I think exposing both the American people and even those abroad to understand what the American government is trying to figure out to it would actually help make for better policy, but it would also make people back up that policy and believe that it's the best policy. And I think what we get from that, the conversation about a deep state is inherently weakening to the United States, because if they think that their representative democracy is no more, they're going to be less supportive of the government. Whereas if they actually know what the policy is and get behind it, that policy is going to be stronger as a result. So I think it's a huge loss in terms of, morale by hiding secrets from the American people, and a huge loss in terms of the doubts about government. So I'm pro opening up, and so I'm pretty clear on that, and have put that in policy, or at least tried to put that into policy a few times. And sometimes I've been successful. I've had times where the Secretary of Defense said, "Okay, let's explain it," and sometimes I haven't been as successful. But I think it's a cause worth pushing for, and it's certainly one of the things I'm advocating for with the book and everything else.
So last thing, and I only have a little time, but I can't not talk to you about this. I mean, I know, first of all, you had one of the first interviews with McMaster since he retired. If you quote.
He was retired, put it nicely,
Aren't I nice? And I'm curious about that, but can you put it in the context of Trump, and do you think Trump is being helpful moving things forward, is making a mess of things? Where are you on all of that in terms of the NSC and, national security and our foreign policy? I think names, I got to tell you, I get ill from some of this, because some of this seems so crazy to me. It just seems crazy when you have people like Steve Bannon, there. And then what happened with Mike Flynn, and who am I missing? I mean, he's gone through how many? And then there's McMaster, who we thought might save the day. So I'll let you finish it off on that.
Yeah, I mean, I think, listen, this was always going to be a hard, the Trump presidency was always going to be hard. I mean, he brings specific views about foreign policy, whether it's trade or things along those lines, that have been very contrary to American tradition and American policy over the past 70 years, right? And so it was never going to be easy, but, he has also, I think, made a habit of not knowing how to work government. And so what he has actually created is more of a mess than he's created, like a very unorthodox foreign policy. He's just created an unorthodox mess because he doesn't know how to actually work policy or work government. And I think that is the biggest frustration is that by breaking the policy and breaking how it's made in Washington, he's actually probably achieved fewer of his objectives and just kind of made everybody less safe and less secure as a result. And so I think that the biggest disappointment for me, and I think the biggest frustration for me, is that you can have your views, and truthfully, the way the U.S. government should work is Donald Trump won, right? So his views were obviously popular enough to win the election. And for most people in government, this situation would be, okay, sir, we'll salute, give us the orders. But he isn't, even because of his sort of approach, this sort of impulsive, impetuous kind of approach to policy, he has no idea how to actually get any of it implemented. And so what you end up in a situation of is both breakdowns, but also, I think, sort of missed and wild goose chases and confusion that are actually more frustrating and potentially riskier than just a policy I disagree with. And so I think that has been, the National Security Council has been the best example of that, whether it's his sort of Michael Flynn's short, miserable tenure, H.R. McMaster's frustrating efforts to try and bring some regular order to the irregular presidency, and his now running, rivalry with his national security advisor that's playing out in the public. None of this is good, but it also means that the policy and what we see is messy enough. You can only just imagine what we're not seeing and worry. And so that's what I worry about and think about more than I should.
Can it be righted when he's gone?
I think what's going to happen is that, if he loses next year, my hunch is that what's going to end up happening is that whoever comes in to replace him will use the effort to fix everything, and the need to fix everything or try to replace or replicate everything will actually lead to a much stronger presidency and a much stronger National Security Council and much more secrecy. And I think that the way Washington has reacted to Trump is not to learn the lessons from what his election means, and instead learn that they need to fight harder against the will of the American people. And I think that that's going to lead to a disaster in the future. So can it be righted? Yes. Are the costs of righting it probably more severe than the actual challenges he's put into place? I would say yes. I think that a further undermining of America's trust in their government is actually going to be a bigger problem in the end than any of the one-off, confusing, frustrating policies he's put into place.
Thanks for that joyous ending. Wonderful book.
I'm sorry to end on a bright note like that.
It's okay. I'm with you on that. It's going to take a long time to fix things. Thanks, John. Great book.
Thanks so much.
I've been speaking with John Gans. His book is White House Warriors, How the National Security Council Transformed the American Way of War. To purchase the book, visit fine bookstores everywhere or Amazon.com. Thank you for tuning in to the Halli Casser-Jayne Show, a production of Resec LLC. The Halli Casser-Jayne Show posts new podcasts Wednesdays, 3 p.m. Eastern, and is available at hallicasserjayne.com and on all your favorite apps. Be sure to visit us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, and follow me on Twitter at The Halli CJ Show. Until next time, this is Halli Casser-Jayne.